with that amount of money and maybe mow the berms. But because of the Transform Manukau project that was beginning to develop in Manukau, we sort of jumped on board and asked Eke Panuku to come on board and consider having a park like this as part of the transformation of the area. And, to their credit, they saw the vision that we had and jumped in. And since 2017, they secured the funding. And through the pandemic and everything else, we were a little bit uncertain at some points, but, I give credit to Richard Davison there, who really made sure the funding was secured.
Lota, we're coming on Saturday to go to the playground, so we might see you there. Lota Fuli, Manukau Council, a bit of, or someone says, Sue, I got the most severe wedgie on that Frank Kitts Park slide. So, that's dangerous. Wonderful stuff to both of you. Sue Kesley, Stephen Jacoby, thank you. I'm Wallace Chapman, back tomorrow, 3:45. Checkpoint with Lisa Owen is next.
Kia ora.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei, take it or leave it. That's the government's offer to 5 Hawke's Bay councils when it comes to the cost split for a buyout scheme for flood-damaged homes. So what's the government prepared to pay and what happens if councils walk away? Napier's mayor joins us. Secondary school teachers could be in line for a 14.5% pay rise. The PPTA is live. Road rage, not everyone's happy about National's 4-lane highway election promise. In the political popularity contest, Labour releases its party list. And forget snail mail, bug enthusiasts are posting live scorpions and spiders. For real. You can watch us live on the RNZ website and Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon. Ahi Marie ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The government has offered a take-it-or-leave-it deal to share the cost of buying out Hawke's Bay cyclone-damaged houses. Napier Mayor Kirsten Wise has told Checkpoint there's been zero negotiation about who pays what for the buyout scheme. The region's 5 councils will this week hold extraordinary meetings to ratify the offer, which covers Category 3 property buyouts, flood protection and urgent roading projects. Meanwhile, Regional Council Chair Hinewai Ormsby says just how much the government's willing to pay won't be revealed until next week. But she says the percentage split differs across the 3 funding areas.
They've all got their different aspects and different projects built within it. So, it's not consistent across the whole 3.
Councils in Auckland and Tairāwhiti are yet to reach an agreement with the government. Hawke's Bay residents say they don't mind who pays for their cyclone-damaged homes, as long as somebody does. Kate Green has more.
At this stage, residents say they simply don't have enough information to comment, and they're frustrated with the pace of decisions. Some are concerned that if the lion's share is to be covered by the council, homeowners will end up paying for their own buyout through rates. Council budgets are already stretched, and they're worried this will come back to bite ratepayers. Those who are expecting a buyout are eager to get the process underway and move on. In the end, they say it doesn't matter who pays for the buyout, as long as homeowners get a fair price.
East Coast residents say their roads need more than band-aid fixes and filled potholes. The government has today announced a further $500 million for state highways in Tairāwhiti, Wairua, Hawke's Bay, Coromandel and Northland. That's on top of the $500 million already provided to Wakakotahi in the aftermath of the cyclone. A roading contractor spoken to by RNZ says in Tairāwhiti, crews often find themselves back at the same sites, fixing the same issues. They say this money will hopefully allow for a more holistic plan to be made for increasing the resilience of the roads rather than just band-aid fixes. The government says there's a fiscal hole in National's newly announced transport plan. National's Transport for the Future plan will build 13 new roads of national significance, as well as rapid transit in Auckland and some cyclone recovery projects. It says the project will cost $24 billion, paid for by reallocating funds from the National Land Transport Fund, additional government investment and private equity. But Transport Minister David Parker says National's at least $2.8 billion short, as it's using old data and hasn't taken into account escalations in construction costs.
It's a false promise if you say you can spend this on new roads when you haven't got the money.
National insists its costings are robust and come from non-funding sources. And a nurses' union is hailing an historic pay equity settlement as a significant milestone. The deal will see some nurses and healthcare workers employed by Te Whatu Ora gain up to $28,000 in additional lump sums and back pay. The pay equity claim made by the New Zealand Nurses Organisation in 2017 will fix long-standing sex-based discrimination. Chief Executive Paul Golter says the move is well overdue.
It's been a long-standing issue for nurses in this country, and to finally get some sort of settlement and the start really of trying to recover this process in the long term is very significant. So I think we've landed on somewhere that really creates the base to try and get on top of this issue.
Strike action next month is still on the cards as nurses are set to vote on the separate collective agreement offer from Te Whatu Ora. To sport now, and Silver Ferns coach Dame Nolene Taurua says the real Netball World Cup starts now. New Zealand crushed Singapore 80-19 to round out pool play unbeaten and now head into the second group phase against hosts South Africa, Jamaica and Wales, with their next game in Cape Town tonight against the Welsh. Australia and Jamaica racked up 100 points against Fiji and Sri Lanka respectively, but Taurua is unconcerned by their opponents' early form.
We'll get down to the business end when we get to the business end, and what's happened in the prelim, once you get to the semis and finals, doesn't matter. So, we just keep chipping away and making sure that we can be better.
Pole vaulter Eliza McCartney has recorded her highest jump in 4 years to win an event in Luxembourg as she ramps up her preparation for next month's World Champs in Budapest. The 2016 Olympic bronze medalist cleared 4.85 metres, her best height since 2019, and the second highest in the world this year, behind world and Olympic champion American Katie Moon.
Really, really happy to hit a season's best, be back in the 80s again for the first time since 2019, so it's been quite a gap. There is a lot more in there, and really looking forward to my next competition in Yachtkrim in 4 or 5 days' time on the 4th of August. That'll be my last one before World Champs.
Co-hosts Australia must beat Canada tonight in Melbourne if they're to advance to the knockout phase of the Women's Football World Cup. And Australia Rugby League great Wally Lewis, who's 63, has revealed he has dementia brought on by years of head knocks across his playing career. That's the news.
The rise of electric vehicles.
85% of Norway's vehicles sold these days are electric. And New Zealand's quite a long way behind those leaders in Europe, but we're still heading in the right direction, which is great to see.
How to stop your e-scooters catching fire.
Use the charger that came with the device or with the battery and try and supervise that battery when it's charging.
And praising Palmerston North.
We've got some great restaurants, whether it be fusion food, Asian food.
The place to be. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. For northern and western areas from Northland to Wellington, including the Central High Country. Mostly cloudy with isolated showers, clearing from Wellington City later today. Coromandel and Bay of Plenty, mainly fine today. Cloudy tomorrow with the odd shower about the ranges. For Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Waded Upper, mainly fine. Cloudy periods in Waded Upper tomorrow with isolated showers in the north. Nelson and Marlborough, mainly fine. Rain developing tomorrow evening, possibly heavy. Buller, Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain or showers with some heavy falls and thunderstorms. Snow lowering to 400 metres in Fiordland tomorrow evening. For Canterbury, fine at first. Scattered rain tomorrow afternoon and evening. Northwest gales inland. Otago and Southland, scattered rain developing this evening, then clearing for a time in the morning. Snow lowering to 400 metres in Southland and Clutha tomorrow evening, and southwest gales developing. And for Rekohu, Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, a few showers for a time tomorrow. The time is 7 minutes past 5. I will have traffic news and headlines for you at about 20 past 5.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. It's been revealed 5 Hawke's Bay councils have been offered a take-it-or-leave-it deal by the government for the shared buyout of high-risk homes hit by extreme weather. In June, the government announced it would carry the cost with councils of buying out so-called Category 3 properties that are deemed too unsafe to return to. As part of the deal, the government will also contribute to flood protection that will give certainty to owners of other at-risk properties, as well as investing in roading. Now, there has been some discussion about that, but Napier Mayor Kirsten Wise says there's been zero negotiation about who pays what for the voluntary buyout scheme. And the 5 councils have to unanimously agree to accept what the government is offering or walk away.
The cost sharing split was never open for negotiation. We were presented with an offer and the Crown were not prepared to move on that at all.
So, sorry, just so I've got this right, it wasn't a negotiation, it was a take-it-or-leave-it offer from the government on the split?
That's correct.
And so, if you choose not to take it, what happens then?
That is a very good question, and that is something that we have obviously already been discussing as a region in terms of, if we decide not to accept this offer, where does that leave us? And the other part of this offer is that all 5 councils have to decide to move forward with it. We have to unanimously agree for the deal to be finalised. So it is dependent on every single council being prepared to accept what's been offered to us.
How do you feel about that all of you have to agree on it?
Well, it does make it far more challenging because different councils benefit in different ways from the offer that's been made to us. Obviously, some of the councils have no property buyouts, but then have significantly more requirements in terms of some of the infrastructure investment that we need. And so our negotiation team went in trying to broker a deal, for a want of a better description, that met as many of the needs of the 5 individual councils as we possibly could. And, there's varying degrees probably of satisfaction with where that offer has landed. And now we will just have to wait for that formal debate and decision, as I said, at our meetings later this week.
Is it in good faith that the government comes to you and says, we're going to talk about a buyout, but it's this offer or no offer?
Oh, look, speaking for myself personally, I did find that a little disappointing. And there's been frustrations along the way. And we've just had to put our best foot forward and, bear in mind that we need to ensure the decisions are made quickly as well for our community. We're so conscious of people wanting to move on with their lives. So it's that balancing act of not wanting things to take too long, but also trying to negotiate the best possible deal we can for our communities.
Kirsten, who presented that to you? Was it the Cyclone Recovery Minister, Grant Robertson, who told you that this was the only option?
Well, we've been working with his negotiation team, which is led by Chris White. So, that's how the information's been funneled between the Crown's negotiating team and our negotiating team.
So the only place where you could make gains is on flood mitigation and protections and funding for that?
Flood mitigation and transport infrastructure are the 2 areas where we have managed to make some quite significant gains, yes.
Do you think the offer on the buyout is a fair one? The take-it-or-leave-it offer, do you deem it fair?
I think our community will struggle with the fact that we have had to enter into a conversation around a cost-sharing approach when, you look at the Christchurch earthquake, where those property buyouts were 100% Crown funded. So, we will be going out to talk to our community about this after we have our meetings at the end of the week. I'm
fully expect there to be some concerns raised by our community that our local ratepayers will be having to partially fund these voluntary property buyouts.
When you say partially, what, half of it?
We can't actually disclose the details of that at the moment because the Minister hasn't provided that level of detail. We need to wait till our council meeting or we will, preempt the decision. So as soon as we've debated the offer, then we'll be in a position after that to provide further detail around what the overall offer looks like.
Isn't that around the wrong way, that councils go behind closed doors, decide whether they like it, vote for it or not, and then tell the residents what they're getting?
Well, we're bound by, obviously, the legalities of the situation, and so the legal advice that we currently have is that we can't release that information publicly. As I said, I have asked our Chief Executive and our Recovery Lead to further discuss that with the lawyers, because that would be my preference, is that we were able to make this information publicly available, but we can't put the whole process at risk from a legal perspective if that's the legal advice that we're receiving.
Kirsten, what have they told you about what formula will be used to value the properties?
There's been a number of conversations around that, and it has been stated that it will be based on pre-cyclone valuations. So we've got our team working through the detail around that at the moment as well, so that as we move into those conversations with our community, then we can provide them with the assurance and information they need to make an informed decision around that buyout for them.
And that's Napier Mayor Kirsten Wise. Meanwhile, councils in Auckland and Tairawhiti are yet to reach an agreement with the government, despite the government's second deadline passing today. Let us know your thoughts on that one. 2101 on text, or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. No negotiation, a take it or leave it offer. 14 minutes after 5, Kia amo tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. National has unveiled its plans for New Zealand's transport network if it's elected in October. Its Transport for the Future plan has a big emphasis on roads, but it insists public transport hasn't been left behind. The Greens are furious, saying it's actually taking New Zealand back to the past, while Labor says the project just doesn't add up. Political reporter Giles Dexter has more.
Roads of national significance is making a comeback. National wants to build 13 of them. The big project, 4 lanes from Whangarei to Tauranga. National's identified 4 stretches of road in Northland, Waikato and Bay of Plenty it can tackle first, and believes work can start on all of them in the next decade.
John F. Kennedy said, let's go to the moon, and people landed on the moon in 9.5 years. And we have a habit here in New Zealand of spending 25 years talking about things and not actually getting things done.
These Northlanders RNZ spoke to are all on board if the roads can be maintained.
I reckon that'd be a really, really cool thing to do. I think it's great. I really think that this is what Northland needs to really get it going.
Well, I think it'd be great, but I think they should probably fix the roads we've already got first.
There's a lot of broken roads already.
To focus on from Whangarei to Tauranga, I feel like is kind of missing a lot of Northland's already really trash roads.
Much of National's plan is new roads or resurrecting projects the Labour government has scrapped. There are a few public transport commitments in the plan, including rapid transit in Auckland and some climate resilience projects in regions affected by Cyclone Gabrielle. But National also wants to swing the axe. Auckland Light Rail is gone, as is much of the Let's Get Wellington Moving project, including, again, light rail. It'll keep plans to build a second road tunnel through Mount Victoria, though, and upgrades around the Basin Reserve. Greater Wellington Regional Council Chair Darren Ponsa says he's not surprised National wants to back out.
It's all very well for National to say that they're going to pull out of Let's Get Wellington Moving, but they have to have a long-term answer to how they're going to get people across and through the city.
The Greens say National's project is visionless. Transport spokesperson Julianne Genter says adding more lanes doesn't solve congestion.
I just think they aren't serious about tackling climate change, and they're missing the opportunity of a more sustainable and productive transport system that gives people real choice, so they aren't locked into spending thousands of dollars a year on a car just to get anywhere.
National says its package will cost $24 billion and wants to pay for it by reallocating money from the National Land Transport Fund, additional government investment and private equity.
There is capital and money washing around that actually wants to come here and invest in infrastructure projects, and we've actually want to welcome that investment.
But the Transport Minister, David Parker, says National's costings are at least $2.8 billion short, and that's just from the 4 roads in the Whangarei to Tauranga project. David Parker says National is using old data and isn't taking into account real-world escalations in construction costs.
It's a false promise if you say you can spend this on new roads when you haven't got the money.
Christopher Luxon is adamant his numbers are sound.
What we've done is we've taken the publicly available costings for each of these projects. We've actually taken the upper band of that, and we've also built contingency into it. So we are very comfortable with our costings.
Both parties have identified transport as a key election issue, but Labour's yet to release its plans. Until it does, it's going to keep digging at National's plan to see if there are any more fiscal potholes.
Breathtakingly misleading and laughable at best. That's Transport Minister David Parker's take on the National Party's costing for one of its big election roading promises. The opposition party announced plans for the 4-lane motorways from Whangarei to Tauranga, with staged projects costed at just over $6 billion. And it promises to deliver them without raising road taxes. Not a chance, says David Parker.
Well, they're out by a minimum of 2.8 billion, probably closer to 4. Understandably, they're not over the same level of detail that we've got in respect of all of these projects, but they should know that, for example, the Tauriko one, which is a Tauranga project, the council's own estimate of that just a month ago was between $2.3 and $2.7 billion. They've used really old figures, and they say $1.9 billion, so they're out by more than $500 million on one project alone.
So, Minister, what are you saying? Are they intentionally misleading the public?
Well, the very least, it's negligent. I mean, making all these promises, you've got to give the public confidence that these things can be paid for. And, the public already know that, we've been left carrying the can for $1 billion cost overruns with the City Rail link, with the cost overruns on Transmission Gully. So they got form. You'd expect that they're paying attention to the publicly available documents like the Tauriko proposal in Tauranga.
OK, well, part of the way they're going to pay for it, they say, is reallocation of funds, and they're going to get rid of Let's Get Wellington Moving. So that's co-funded by the government. They say it's achieved absolutely nothing. Do you agree with them that it's failed to fire?
No, I do actually agree with the Wellington City and the Wellington Regional Council that the part of that project that is on State Highway 1 is mainly a central government responsibility, not a local government responsibility. But they just last week they said, they came having a crack on potholes, you'll recall, said that they were going to reallocate $500 million from somewhere else in the transport portfolio. And again, they're headlines.
But when they're talking about Let's Get Wellington Moving, if we can stick with that, you think there's some value with that project, or would you scrap it?
Well, I'm not saying that today. You'll know what our...
Are you going to say it on another day, Minister?
No, not necessarily. I'm not. I'm just making the point that our fully costed transport policy will be out before the election. Today, I was trying to hold them to account for the sake of the public on unfunded promises in their transport plan.
Excuse the pun, though. It's a two-way street. So do you believe or not that Let's Get Wellington Moving has value?
I certainly think that there is congestion around the Basin Reserve and heading towards the airport that needs to be fixed, and that's part of Let's Get Wellington Moving.
And are they the people to do it?
The Let's Get Wellington Moving? Oh, look, yeah. I think the council make a fair point that in respect of the State Highway 1 components of that is primarily a central government obligation to fund.
OK. Now, you talked about rising costs and the unpredictable nature of costs. Well, you've had one of those situations yourself with the pricing on the Auckland Light Rail project, right? Most recently costed at $30 billion. Are you committed to that project post-election?
Well, the final recommendations on that won't come out until after the election. Auckland City have said to us that they think that there ought to be more work done on the surface alternative to the tunnelled option, and we agree with that. And so we are asking the Auckland Light Rail people to do more work on the costs, benefits and disadvantages of the surface option as well.
Yeah, OK, so that's sort of tweaking or deciding on exactly what components it will have. You yourself described it today as a very expensive project, and you used the words if and when it goes ahead, which opens the door to the suggestion it may not go ahead. Is that a possibility?
Well, that's always been a possibility and remains a possibility because we have never finally committed to configuration. So, yes, of course, that remains a possibility.
So it could be scrapped after the election, Minister? It could be completely scrapped?
Well, that's not what I'm saying. You just asked me, is it possible that it could be? I suppose it's always been possible that it will be until it's finally committed to. We have asked for further information as to the surface option, partly because the Mayor of Auckland says, and I think he's right, that we need more information on that alternative.
But then that will just be more delays and never for it to get underway.
Well, I agree that there are some real traffic congestion issues in Auckland that public transport and mass transport is part of the answer to. You know, the most successful project in the history of New Zealand on public transport is actually the Northern Busway, which at peak times I think carries about 40% of the people that go across the bridge in one lane of the I forget the number of lanes. Is it 8 lanes that we've got there? Mass transport is absolutely crucial to the future of Auckland's traffic congestion and the affordability of people getting around.
And that's Transport Minister David Parker. It is 23 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program. Let us know your thoughts on the government buyout scheme, voluntary scheme, supposed to be shared costs with councils. 5 councils in the Hawke's Bay have said they've had a not negotiable offer from the government, take it or leave it. Let us know your thoughts on that one. Also roads and whether more should be built, 4-lane highways, light rail. Seems like it's got a question mark over it. Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Evie's here with the headlines. Ko Evie anō tēnei.
The government's made a take-it-or-leave-it offer to share the cost of buying out cyclone-damaged houses in Hawke's Bay, but how much it's willing to give the region's 5 councils won't be revealed until next week. All 5 need to agree to the offer for it to go ahead. National's $24 billion transport plans are undergoing a political warrant of fitness check, with the Greens accusing the party of wanting to drive the country backwards by focusing on roads, and with Labour tearing holes in the finances. National wants to build 13 roads of national significance and 4-lane motorways from Whangarei to Tauranga. It says the Let's Get Wellington Moving project should be axed, but would commit to a rapid transport network in Auckland and resilience projects. Meanwhile, the government is spending more than $500 million on immediate repairs to state highways in cyclone-affected regions. $567 million will be spent in Tairāwhiti, Wairua, Hawke's Bay, Coromandel and Northland. The New Zealand Nurses Organisation says members' overwhelming support for an historic gender pay equity settlement is a significant milestone. But nurses are still to vote on a separate collective agreement offer from Te Whatu Order, so strike action next month remains a possibility. And an arbitration panel has recommending a 14.5% pay rise for secondary teachers to be given over 3 instalments. If the government agrees to it, members of the Post-Primary Teachers Association will get to vote on the offer next week. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic. In the South Island, a serious crash on State Highway 6 near Meadows Road may be causing delays. In Auckland, a breakdown just after 4 p.m. on the southern motorway after Gillies Ave southbound may still also be causing new delays tonight. Our next traffic news and headlines are at about 5:40.
Ngā mihi, Evie. And we've got a statement here from Auckland's Mayor Wayne Brown. This is on the Category 3 buyout negotiations. Have you heard earlier? 5 Hawke's Bay councils have had a take-it-or-leave-it offer from the government. And Auckland is still negotiating, despite the deadline being today for it to be sorted. And Mayor Wayne Brown says negotiations for a cost-sharing agreement for a voluntary buyout scheme of high-risk Category 3 residential properties in the region are progressing. And he is optimistic the 2 parties will reach a resolution soon. Auckland, like every other region, will require significant support from central government to be able to afford the cost of the proposed property buyouts and longer-term investment to improve the city's resilience to these events. Affordability and cost control will be the key, says Wayne Brown, and decisions on the scope and speed of the fix-up will depend on the extent of government support. We understand people want clarity on this as soon as possible, and we're working as fast as we can, but it is a complex work and we owe it to all ratepayers to proceed carefully, says Wayne Brown. And the government's second deadline was, of course, today to get that sorted. The Silver Ferns are in unbeatable form at the Netball World Cup, where they're hoping to go back-to-back after winning in 2019. But star shooter Grace Nweke is under an injury cloud after she hobbled off the court with a knee problem in the win against Singapore. Our sports reporter Bridget Tunnicliffe joins us now from Cape Town. Bridget, so the Silver Ferns meet Wales tonight. I mean, how have they been looking so far?
Yeah, I mean, they've been looking pretty good. Had a big win over Trinidad and Tobago. They were pushed by Uganda, but they beat them by 10 goals. Singapore game last night was a whitewash, 80-19. But as you mentioned, Grace Nweke did come off in the partway through the third quarter and had ice applied to her knee. I've just had confirmation from Netball New Zealand rep over here that she will sit out this game against Wales, and it makes complete sense to do that because Wales should be an easy win for New Zealand, but progressively throughout the week the games are going to get harder and harder, so it makes complete sense to rest her for this game. They're saying it's just precautionary. They've got to look after her because later this week we've got South Africa and then we've got Jamaica. Jamaica are looking dangerously good. They actually beat South Africa last night by 20 goals and they have put up they've cracked the 100 mark here. So they've had 100 goals against, I think it was Sri Lanka. And on the other side of the draw, Australia cracked 100 against Fiji. So, after the game against Singapore last night, Nolan wasn't 100% happy, and she knows that they're going to meet way tougher opposition later in this Netball World Cup. So they've got to really maintain high standards, and so they've got to really look after the little details.
Okay, it's interesting that this is happening now, and obviously we've got the football here in New Zealand and the All Blacks. Can you tell us a bit about the atmosphere and attention it's getting where you are?
Yeah, it's definitely, there's a real buzz in Cape Town. This is the first time South Africa have ever hosted the Netball World Cup. It's the first time it's been hosted in Africa. I have to say the security presence is pretty massive. Cape Town is not the safest city on the planet. It is a complete shame that the football ferns aren't progressing to the next stages, but I always thought it was a shame that this Netball World Cup was scheduled at the same time as the FIFA Women's Football Cup, and I wondered whether it would take away some of the attention on both sides. So obviously the FIFA World Cup is a massive deal in New Zealand, but the Silver Ferns are defending champions, and if they can go back-to-back, it'll be the first time in their history that they've done it. So it is a pretty big deal.
Thank you for the update, Bridget. That's Bridget Tunnicliffe joining us live from Cape Town there. And back home, it can be a fraught political process ranking your incumbent MPs and any aspiring members of Parliament on the party list. The list determines placings for MPs and candidates, and for those who don't end up winning an electorate seat. Labor secured 65 seats in the 2020 landslide, but on current polling, could lose 20 or so MPs. Labor's list for the 2023 election was announced today, and there's not too many surprises, which is notable in itself. Our political editor, Jane Patterson, joins us now from our Parliament studio. OK, Jane, would have we expected a bit more of a radical list shake-up and line-up in the position that Labor is in?
Not particularly. This is a governing party that's under real pressure to shore up its support and shore up its team. So, as you said in your intro there, on their current polling, they could lose up to about 20 MPs at the election. So they really need to look at how they rank their MPs and really to avoid any unnecessary controversy in the meantime. So that means that all of the current sitting Cabinet MPs, Cabinet Ministers and senior MPs are in safe places on the list, as is the Speaker of the House, Adrian Durafe, which would be usual. But of course, there are always people who are going to miss out, and there are some sitting MPs in trouble. They include Anna Lorke, Angie Warren-Clark, Liz Craig and Sarah Pallett, all down in the danger zone in terms of not being in electorate seats that are necessarily Labour's to win, and also low enough on the list that they could be in trouble in terms of being re-elected.
And in terms of some of those more high-profile names as well, Jane, Michael Wood, for example, former minister, way down at, what was he, 45?
45, that's right. A clear message to Michael Wood. Either you're going to have to win back your Mount Roskill seat that he has won with a handy majority, but it'd be interesting to see whether voters punish him for his ministerial failures in terms of conflicts of interest, or decide that he's a really good electorate MP and re-elect him. But maybe it's a bit dicey about relying on the list to come back into Parliament. So a message there. The other notable movements are Willow Jean Prime and Joe Luxton, both of Māori descent, who have been moved up into the top 20 ahead of other ministers, the likes of Duncan Webb, Deborah Russell and Rachel Brooking. Now with Kitty Allen, of course, signalling that she will leave Parliament or leave politics in October. And also Nanaia Mahuta, a senior Māori MP, standing only in her seat, not on the list. Chris Hipkins said that having a list that reflects the population of New Zealand and diversity is important. So there's a strong showing through the list by Māori and also by women candidates as well.
Willie Jackson, one who's benefited from a rise. He was, 19 and he's gone up to 8.
That's right, and that reflects his ministerial seniority as well, in terms of having been, not such a senior member of the Cabinet, but coming up, but also showing the strength of that Māori caucus. As I said, a good showing. I think 6 Māori MPs in the top 20, so rounding out there, and with women. And of course, these diversity mixes as well as geographical parties do look at, and parties can come under a lot of criticism, as we saw with National the last election, if they don't get that mix right as well.
There has been a bit of discussion at the announcement about Tamati Coffey, right? So he was retiring from Parliament, and then all of a sudden, obviously, Kiritapu Allen is no longer standing, and he's back. Is he back because he put his hand up, or he got shoulder tapped?
Well, he said that he was, quote, tapped on the shoulder when he was speaking to Morning Report this morning, and he said that he had been approached by colleagues once Kitty Allen's East Coast seat had become available because of her departure. The party President Jill Day and the leader Chris Hipkins were asked about his return to Parliament, or his return to candidacy, at the announcement this morning, and they said it hadn't been a shoulder tap from the party leadership. So it sounds like he had some colleagues close to him encourage him to come forward. Chris Hipkins was also asked, is this an MP that voters should really, put their trust in? He's someone that had said that he had, finished his time in politics. He didn't know whether he had enough gas in the tank. Chris Hipkins was very supportive. He said he is running on all cylinders, and he is confident that he will do well in that seat.
Thanks for that, Jane. That is Jane Patterson, RNZ political editor there, joining us from Wellington. It is 25 minutes away from 6. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Ko taku hoa e nai ko Kim Moody, who is here to talk all things business. So, Kim, a record number of complaints to the Financial Services Council. What's that about?
Kia ora, Lisa. Yeah, so the number of people complaining about financial lenders has actually spiked as more people are starting to really feel that economic strain. So the Financial Services Complaints Arm of the Financial Ombudsman Service, it says the number of disputes that the service formally investigated, so formally looked into, that actually spiked by 37% in the past year, and the number of complaints it received increased by 25%. So Financial Ombudsman Susan Taylor says the service received just under 1,350 complaints in the past year. That compares to 1,077 in the past year. Now, non-bank lenders made up a large chunk of the complaints. And Susan Taylor actually said this is a common thing to see during tough economic times. So she said, look, there might be more people that are defaulting on their loans. They're really struggling to make repayments. It's reflective of the changes in the wider economic environment. We know inflation's really high. We know interest rates are really high. Some people are really struggling. financially. And she said that does tend to historically correlate with a rise in complaints. So people will either be asking their lenders for support that they aren't able to get, or they weren't able to get the support that they were looking for from their lenders, perhaps deferring on payments, things like that. So they've complained about it to try and get some further support. Although, some people do just know more about the options available in terms of being able to complain. So she said this is a bit reflective of the environment that we have. So she's saying, look, if you are in that situation, talk to your lender as soon as you can. Don't get to this point where it's down the line you're having to involve the council. Of course, they always are there. And she said, get in touch with them as well. She also put out another warning about high-risk investments. So there's a lot of scams about. We report on scams a lot. But high-risk investments can do a lot of damage as well. So there was a complaint to the council after an investor lost more than $150,000 in a deal that was a really sophisticated investment. It's something very confusing where you trade CFDs, you can speculate on the change in the value of an underlying asset. Basically, it's a legitimate deal, but you can get really high returns, you can get a huge loss. And this investor did not quite understand the ins and outs of it. They were left more than $150,000 out of pocket. They complained to the council saying, look, it wasn't clear enough that the risks that I was against, they weren't clearly disclosed. Financial Ombudsman came back and said it actually was. And if you're going to be investing money, you need to know what's going on. So once again, if you don't know the ins and outs of your investment, just take a breather. Maybe don't invest for now.
And what is this I hear that the EFTPOS card is on the way out?
Yes, apparently, according to the Commerce Commission. So it's actually looking at how more people can make in-person payments between bank accounts. So the Commission Chair, John Small, he said EFTPOS cards are actually losing popularity. Now, when we're talking about EFTPOS cards, these are the traditional EFTPOS cards that you can swipe. He said that's only making up about 20% of payments now. More and more of people are actually using the banks that are a Visa or a MasterCard that has a little chip on it, and you can use that for your contactless payment. So that's kind of more of a credit card. Of course, people are also using Apple Pay, paying through their smartphones, things like that. So yeah, he says the decline of the EFTPOS card apparently. So what the Commerce Commission is doing is looking into whether there can be options for people to pay basically through a bank transfer. But he said, think of it as when you log into your online banking on your phone, you move money between accounts, but you're actually paying for your flat white. So the Commerce Commission is looking into whether it can use its powers to kind of provide more options here, whether it should. It's consulting on that at the moment, and that consultation will close at the end of September.
And Kim, let's take a spin around the markets.
Yes, the New Zealand market closing up 0.9%, or 109 points to 12,056. New Zealand dollars trading at 62 US cents, 92.7 Australian cents and 48.1 pence.
Thank you, Kim. That is Kim Moody with Business News, 20 to 6, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And let's get to some of your feedback now. A few of you getting in touch about our interview with the Napier Mayor about the buyout offer made by the government. It's non-negotiable. They've been made an offer. They can take it or leave it. Hugh from Tauranga says the Crown only makes take it or leave it offers for treaty settlements. Welcome to our world, says Hugh. AJ says, given we have no national plan for managed retreat, etc., as a taxpayer, I frankly hope the government has contributed as little as possible. Many taxpayers like myself haven't owned a home yet. Why should we pay for others to have theirs replaced? And another person says, our local councils approved development, have set mitigation priorities and made decisions on behalf of ratepayers. When they get the decisions wrong, then why should the taxpayer foot the bill? That's from Dean in Waipukaro. Thank you for your feedback. Do keep it coming. 2101 on text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Let us know your thoughts on that buyout, on National's plans for roads, and whether the EFTPOS card is dead or not. Interested in your thoughts on that. Evie is standing by with the headlines. Anea Evie, mena piti kōrero.
Auckland's Mayor Wayne Brown says the city is still in talks over how much money the government will put towards buying out flood-damaged houses. The 5 councils in Hawke's Bay have been given a take-it-or-leave-it offer, although the government has yet to say how much it's offering. The High Court at Christchurch has heard that Lauren Dickerson tried to take her own life because she didn't want to leave her 3 daughters behind or leave them without her. Mrs Dickerson denies the murders of Carla, Maya and Liane at their Timaru home in September 2021. A risk management expert has told the Auckland District Court that visits to Whakaari should have stopped when Ngāti Awa bought White Island Tours for $9 million in 2017. Victoria University's Chris Peace says there was no assessment of how safe tours were. It's the 4th week of a trial into alleged health and safety failings in the lead-up to the 2019 eruption, which killed 22 people. A suicide bomb attack on a leading Islamist party political rally in northwest Pakistan has killed at least 44 people and injured 150. Local leaders of the Jemaat Ulama Islam party were among those killed in the blast in the Habu Patunkhwa district. And a person suffered critical injuries when an e-scooter burst into flame in a central Wellington apartment on Saturday night. Fire and Emergency is urging owners of e-scooters and e-bikes powered by lithium-ion batteries to take care when charging the devices. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic in the South Island, there's been a serious crash on State Highway 6 near Meadows Road. In Auckland, due to a breakdown on the Harbour Bridge, the left southbound lane is blocked. And a crash has closed State Highway 2 at Tangoio in Hawke's Bay, south of Tangoio Settlement Road. Our next news and weather is at 6 o'clock.
Kia ora rā e ho. Secondary teachers should get a 14.5% pay rise delivered in 3 instalments, according to an arbitration panel ruling. The pay standoff went to arbitration after talks broke down between the Education Ministry and the Post-Primary Teachers Association and followed strikes around the country. The panel has recommended a 6% pay rise backdated to the start of this month, followed by a further 4% in April next year and 3.9% in December next year. The PPTA's acting president, Chris Abercrombie, joins us now. Kia ora, Chris.
Kia ora.
Do you like the look of this?
We're satisfied with the recommendations of the arbitration panel. It's not everything we wanted, but it is definitely better than the last ministry offer.
Okay, is there lump sum payments included as well?
Yes, there is. So there'll be a $5,000 payment for all secondary teachers, prorated for part-time teachers, obviously, and then a $1,500 payment just for PPTA members only, again, prorated for part-time teachers. So
are you going to recommend this to your members, and what's the process from here?
Yes, so in line with the terms of reference, we will be recommending this to our members. We're waiting to hear back from Cabinet. Cabinet has to recommend this, has to approve it, and so we're just waiting to hear back from them. We've been told we expect a decision on Wednesday, and once that happens, we'd expect an offer of settlement, and then we'll put it out to members.
So this Wednesday?
Yes, this Wednesday, yes, we expect an offer. We expect the decision from Cabinet.
So there are bits that you like, some things that you say weren't exactly what you were after. So I'm wondering, who was having to do the most compromising here, do you reckon?
I think both sides had to show some compromise. It is more than the ministry wanted to offer, and we made some compromises on some of there's some compromise on some of the issues that we've raised. But we're satisfied with this recommendation, and we're really hopeful that the government will support it, will recommend it, and then we'll be able to move forward.
Okay, so you're happy with it, but there were some things that you would have liked better on. So what's the biggest disappointment in this?
One of our big disappointments is around our cultural competency claims. So we've got some good stepping stones. 335 allowances will be created for a trial. So it's fantastic. That's really good, but it's not as much as we wanted. And so we're really hopeful they'll be able to work well and we'll be able to put them into our collective next time.
So in real terms, what does this look like for a starting teacher if this offer goes through and a top of the scale teacher versus what it is now?
So for, say, take top of the scale teacher now, it would be an extra $13,000 by the time it finishes, 2nd of December 2024. And our beginning teachers will be a pay rise of about $10,000 between now and the start of 2025. But those teachers will move up the scale as well. So if you're a beginning teacher in the start of 2025, you'll be earning about $10,000 more than you would this year.
This has gone on for some time, and I'm wondering, do you feel that you started to lose the room with parents with the industrial action and it's time to seal the deal now and get it done?
Absolutely not. We've absolutely had some parents share their frustrations with us about the industrial action, but nearly every single parent that spoke to me said that they were supportive of what we were doing. They were just frustrated with the industrial action, and we're frustrated with it as well. So we're really hopeful this will be able to reach a settlement, and we really call on the government to support the decisions of the panel, and so we can all move forward.
Interesting in the detail, the arbitration panel recognised that salaries were going backwards due to the cost of living, right, and the rising price of everything, and did some quite focused calculations on making adjustments to your pay accordingly. What do you think the implications are for others fighting for pay rises and also around the equity issues?
Well, I think it shows some real clear cost of living increase, cost of living pressures on people in New Zealand. And the panel, as you say, was really detailed in their analysis of this and came up with a recommendation based on what they thought was the best data for it. And so I'm really hopeful that this could potentially help other people in their fight.
Really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us. That is the PPTA's acting president, Chris Abercrombie. Hundreds of people with storm-damaged homes are still living in hotels and motels more than 4 months on from the Auckland floods and Cyclone Gabrielle. The contracts for those lodgings have contributed to a spend of more than $27 million by the government's Temporary Accommodation Service, or TAS, since it was activated in February. And with a limited pool of private rentals available, TAS says people can stay in these pricey rooms as long as they need. Tom Taylor reports.
When Cyclone Gabrielle brought landslides down the cliffs near her Muriwai home, Amy Nelson had to evacuate overnight. A week later, and her family of 6 had already moved between 4 different houses, staying on the couches of neighbours and friends. When she called the Temporary Accommodation Service, she says they were already overwhelmed.
They were basically just like, we've got nothing. Take anything you can get. There's nothing in your area. There's barely anything in Auckland. Good luck to you. If you find anything, grab it with both hands and worry about how to pay for it afterwards. That was their advice.
Fellow Muriwai resident Lauren had a similar experience.
It was like subsidised rent, which for a family of 5 is like $650 a week, which doesn't feel like much of a subsidy, especially when you're having to pay a mortgage as well. And then the fact that, you can say where you'd like to live, but there's no guarantees that you'd get a rental in your community.
While TAS was telling people to get into whatever housing they could, the service was also scrambling to secure whatever they could. It meant that in Auckland, some people who were able to access the service ended up in 5-star hotels like Movenpick, Pullman or JW Marriott, while others went into motels or serviced apartments. When his Massey home was flooded, Trusha Mesuria and his family of 4 were put up at the Crown Plaza in the CBD. A standard room there typically goes for between $200 and $300 a night, and the family needed 2 of them. Although it might sound like a nice staycation, Trusha says it came with a brand new set of challenges.
We had to travel 22 kilometers a day to just drop our kids to school and pick them up from there. There is no kitchen facilities and stuff. So basically you can't cook anything. There was not even a toaster to toast your bread.
After 3 weeks, TAS moved them into an apartment in Henderson, much nearer to home. But even after the TAS subsidy, Trusha's still paying $450 a week in rent, while also forking out almost $500 on mortgage payments. The family's been living in the apartment for about 3 months, but Trusha says he's nervous he might get moved out at a moment's notice.
Most of our items in the boxes or the clothes, we keep it in a bag, because in case they said, okay, you have to move, I don't want to keep unpacking and repacking again and again.
While Trusha's hotel stay was short-lived, hundreds of others are still living in commercial accommodation. In Auckland alone, TAS has 150 serviced apartments, 88 houses, 84 apartments, and 39 hotel units on its books, although some of these may be vacant. In Hawke's Bay, motels are more common. As of May 31st, the government had spent $27.8 million providing accommodation through TAS. Head of Accommodation Response Fadia Murdafa says in the aftermath of the devastating storms, the priority was to get people into shelter at all costs.
It is, in many cases, just the best option. We do have a housing issue, so it is not something that's readily available.
TAS doesn't have a limit on how much it can spend on a household's accommodation. Instead, it subsidises based on the lowest quartile of market rent for the region, whether people are put up in 5-star hotels or holiday parks.
So even if we're providing them with commercial accommodation, they only have to pay 90% of that lower quartile, even if it means we're paying a lot more than that, because we've had to house them in an emergency accommodation. So it is very heavily subsidised.
Ms. Murdafa says while TAS is always looking to get people out of hotels and into more stable accommodation, it won't be forcing anyone out.
As long as they can continue to be eligible for TAS, they can continue to stay.
A new form of support to help displaced people with the cost of renting begins in early September. Families will be able to access up to $610 a week in temporary accommodation assistance payments. The government's allocated $10 million to the cause, which it says could support 300 households in private rentals for 12 months. Meanwhile, subsidies for the more than 400 households still in TAS lodgings could continue to cost the government tens of millions more.
Tom Taylor reporting there. A jury has heard how Lauren Dickerson told a psychiatrist that killing her 3 children was a package deal. The 42-year-old is on trial for the murder of her 3 young daughters, Maya, Carla and Leonie, in Timaru in September 2021. Now, a warning, parts of this story are distressing. Earlier, Crown prosecutors challenged clinical views that the mother was psychotic and delusional at the time she killed her children. Adam Burns was in the High Court in Christchurch.
Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Susan Hadders-Friedman again faced cross-examination by the Crown today. Prosecutor Andrew McRae put it to her that she was hamstrung by the time it took to see Lauren Dickerson in person.
You're looking at it from a distance, so 18, 19 months down the track, without seeing the individual in front of you very close in time to the incident that occurred. That is a weakness, isn't it?
Dr. Hadders-Friedman told the court it was not optimal, but felt she had a comprehensive picture to diagnose. She believes Mrs. Dickerson had a mental disorder caused from childbirth at the time of the killings. But Mr. McRae highlighted clinical judgments at Hill Morton Hospital that did not identify psychosis.
Will you accept from me that throughout November, January, these reports from Dr. Pankhurst continue to indicate that there was no evidence of psychotic disclosures or prominent dissociative symptoms over the course of that period of time?
Appearing via audio-visual link, Dr. Hadders-Friedman said a major disorder had not been ruled out by psychiatric professionals.
She certainly doesn't present as someone who is obviously psychotic in a very clear way, and that's why it's important to be reading about the symptoms, reading about the notations. She's an intelligent woman, she's a doctor.
The court heard how Mrs. Dickerson held delusional beliefs of New Zealand being dangerous after arriving in 2021.
Her negative cognitions appeared to reach a delusional level. That is, they had become fixed false beliefs inconsistent with those of others from her culture. She noted that her trips to Pack and Save and taking the children to school revealed sad and uncared for children in New Zealand.
The Crown asked the doctor whether a negative outlook of a new community qualified as delusional.
A negative view of people within a particular small community is not necessarily abnormal or unusual from somebody who has just arrived in the country, is it?
Mr. McRae argued that Mrs. Dickerson was functioning at a high level the week she killed her 3 girls. But Dr. Hadders-Friedman disputed suggestions she was able to consider her actions the night they died.
A complete break from reality was what I wasn't saying. I was saying out of touch with reality in this specific area. I'm struggling to understand what a complete break with reality would be. She knew where she was. She knew what she was doing.
Mrs. Dickerson appeared anguished, holding her head in her hands at times today. The jury heard how the accused described to a psychiatrist why she tried to take her own life.
I asked her when she decided to end her life, to which she stated, quote, "I knew it would be a package deal. I didn't want to be left behind or to leave them behind."
Dr. Eric Monasterio has begun his testimony this afternoon. The trial continues tomorrow.
It's 5 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Fire and Emergency says the increasing number of vehicles and devices powered by lithium-ion batteries poses a growing fire risk. The warning comes after a person suffered critical injuries when an e-scooter burst into flames in a central Wellington apartment on Saturday night. Bill Hickman reports.
Fire and Emergency National Risk Manager Pete Gallagher is urging owners of e-scooters and e-bikes powered by lithium-ion batteries to take care when charging the devices. He says damaged or overheated batteries can enter a state called thermal runaway, an unstoppable chemical reaction where the battery combusts suddenly.
These products have come into New Zealand and they've hit the markets and everyone's out there with them without understanding what those risks are and what the potential is for how to deal with them when something goes wrong. So it's really about making the public aware around the risk.
Pete Gallagher says users need to be sure to charge the devices uncovered and on hard surfaces that will dissipate any build-up of heat. If they do catch fire, the batteries can spit flaming material and the fire can easily spread.
In a home situation, the best thing to do is get out of the way of the battery. There's really very little you can do without protective clothing and a very good understanding of the battery chemistry and what's likely to occur in order to be able to safely extinguish the fire.
Jono Leonard, owner of the electric scooter shop in Takapuna, says in 6 years of selling scooters, he's never seen one catch fire. He says the batteries are usually one of the most robust parts of the scooter, but his staff are still prepared if things should go wrong.
We do have lithium-ion specific fire extinguisher because you definitely don't want to be spraying water on a fire like that, and even standard foam's not going to be ideal. We've also got leather welding gloves and mask in case we did have to pick something up that had started to smoulder and get it out of the building.
Jono Leonard says the growing popularity of e-scooters means people should be wary of cheap or second-hand scooters. He says a major red flag is if the charger is not matched in specification or brand to the scooter.
I've seen some absolutely dreadful products, and it turns up for servicing at our place quite often, and sometimes we just have to turn it away and say, look, we don't even know what that is.
Owner of My Ride bike store, Fraser McMaster, says bikes and scooters should be well maintained and chargers turned off as soon as the battery is full.
We've worked on thousands and we've never had any sort of fire from an e-bike. It's just a practical approach that if you look after them, they generally look after you. Chargers do get warm, and so you should always be able to touch the charger. If you can't touch it because it's too hot, then something's going wrong.
Fenn says people shouldn't charge the devices in their homes while sleeping or where they might block escape routes.
And that was Bill Hickman reporting. Let's get to some of your feedback now. I've been getting in touch about the buyout. This is the government negotiation, although some councils have said it's not a negotiation. This person says we're talking about multi-billion-dollar payouts, and this is only the beginning of what's likely to be needed as the climate goes into new territory. Paid for by people who don't want to pay tax. If we want generous payouts and the kind of care we once had, people have to be ready to pay more taxes, not less. It has to be funded somehow. That's from Francis. That's the joint buyout scheme of Category 3 homes, which are deemed too risky to go back to after the extreme weather. Council and government are going to share the costs. Question mark is how that will be shared. Someone else says, work out how to fund the losses. Makes sense to me that the national purse, taxpayers, and the regional local purse share that for regional losses. The local purse will have local knowledge. The main point is that we all realise that climate change costs. And funny enough, that theme carries on with National's roading policy, where people are saying, have they not heard of climate change? I think the National Party needs to be informed of global warming and not go on building roads, says Catherine. Another listener says National is on the button with Let's Get Wellington Moving. It is a laughingstock. And Phil in Wellington says that he's a bit confused by Chris Luxon's reference to JFK. He says it's flat out weird. Kennedy wanted to send his country to the moon. National wants to drive us back to the Stone Age, where we will be if we don't take climate change seriously. Yeah.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening. Ngā mihi o te pō, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. Napier's mayor says her community will struggle to accept the government's proposal for the shared buyout of cyclone-damaged homes. Hawke's Bay councils will this week vote on an offer to split the cost of buying out Category 3 homeowners, increasing flood protections and fixing the roads. The proportions to be paid haven't been made public, but Kirsten Wise has told Checkpoint residents are unhappy that ratepayers will foot some of the bill.
You look at the Christchurch earthquake, where those property buyouts were 100% Crown funded. So, we will be going out to talk to our community about this after we have our meetings at the end of the week. I fully expect there to be some concerns raised.
Kirsten Wise says she's disappointed by the take it or leave it deal and says the cost sharing factor was never up for negotiation. Auckland's mayor says the city's council is still in negotiations with the government about how much money it will put towards buying out flood-damaged houses. Wayne Brown says he's optimistic the two parties will reach a resolution soon. He says Auckland will require significant support from the government to be able to afford the proposed voluntary buyouts. Meanwhile, more than $500 million will be spent on immediate repairs to state highways in cyclone-affected regions. $567 million will be spent on replacing, strengthening and rebuilding damaged bridges. The funding, which comes from this year's budget, will also go towards fixing potholes and cracks in the roads. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins says the extra funding will be used to build resilient infrastructure.
Now that almost all of the road links have been restored in cyclone and flood affected areas, many of those roads need to be made safer and more resilient. So we need more permanent solutions in place where Bailey bridges were put in to reopen river crossings, for example.
The government says there's a fiscal hole in National's newly announced transport plan. National's Transport for the Future plan will build 13 new roads of national significance, as well as rapid transit in Auckland and some cyclone recovery projects. It says the project will cost $24 billion, paid for by reallocating funds from the National Land Transport Fund, additional government investment and private equity. But Transport Minister David Parker says National is at least $2.8 billion short, as it's using old data and hasn't taken into account rising construction costs. National insists its costings are robust and come from non-funding sources. A jury has heard how Lauren Dickerson told a psychiatrist that killing her 3 children was part of a package deal. The 42-year-old is on trial in the High Court. Frog in my throat. The 42-year-old is on trial in the High Court at Christchurch, charged with the 2021 murders of her daughters, twins Carla and Maya, and Liane. Mrs. Dickerson has pleaded not guilty to all 3 murders, with her defence arguing insanity and infanticide. Susan Hatters-Friedman has told the court how the accused described to a psychiatrist why she tried to take her own life. Dr. Hatters-Friedman says Mrs. Dickerson did not want to be left behind or leave her daughters behind. A risk management expert has told a court it wasn't safe to operate any tours on Whakaari White Island, but the fact it is the country's most active volcano was used as a selling point. It's the 4th week of a trial in the Auckland District Court into health and safety failings in the lead up to the eruption in 2019 that killed 22 people. Victoria University's Chris Peace says tourists weren't given adequate or timely information about the risks, including that they could be killed or injured.
The disclosures did not fully describe the volcanic hazards and potential for death or serious injury. Instead, the fact that it was active was used as a selling point. For example, that tourists would see something incredible.
Dr. Peace told the court such information would have deterred most tourists and made the tours impractical. An independent panel wants a new body to improve communication between teacher unions and the Education Ministry. The panel, which recommends a 14.5% pay rise for secondary teachers, is also calling for an independently chaired committee to bring together the Post-Primary Teachers Association and the Ministry. The union's acting president, Chris Abercrombie, says it's a good idea.
It's something that we've been interested in for a long time, but this is just incredibly frustrating that we have to keep coming back and doing this again and again in negotiation times. It's not what teachers want to be doing, it's not what the union wants to be doing. We want a really settled environment. So anything that can help that happen, we'll be interested in looking at.
Chris Abercrombie says the union is satisfied with the results of the arbitration. And at least 44 people have been killed in a suicide bomb attack on a political rally by a leading Islamist party in northwest Pakistan. Local leaders of the Jamiat Ulama Islam party were among the dead. Officials say up to 150 people were injured at the blast in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa district. No group has admitted responsibility. The BBC's Ambarasan Etirajan says the party has been previously targeted by militants.
Some of the leaders were attacked a couple of years ago in the Balochistan province. Also, they came under attack in 2014. The leader of the group, Maulana Fazlur Rahman, came under a suicide attack, but he escaped very narrowly. So there have been attacks on them claimed by Islamic State group of South Asia chapter and also another Sunni Muslim extremist group, because they think this political party is not truly Islamic. But this is a rude awakening and shock to political parties.
That's the news.
I'm Catherine Ryan. On 9 to noon tomorrow, as fraud scams become more sophisticated, what are banks doing to combat it? And should they be liable for your losses? The largest litigation against the Crown in New Zealand's history is about to get underway. We look at the case relating to the Nelson Tenth's reserves. And Rachel Louise Snyder survived neglect and abuse in an evangelical family to become a globally recognised journalist and author. She tells her full story. With me on 9 to noon on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Please excuse that croaky delivery of the 6 o'clock bulletin. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. For northern and western areas from Northland to Wellington, including the central high country. Mostly cloudy with isolated showers clearing from Wellington City later today. Coromandel and Bay of Plenty mainly fine today. Cloudy tomorrow with the odd shower about the ranges. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa mainly fine. Cloudy periods in Wairarapa tomorrow with isolated showers in the north. Mainly fine for Nelson and Marlborough. Rain developing tomorrow evening, possibly heavy. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain or showers with some heavy falls and thunderstorms. Snow lowering to 400 metres in Fiordland tomorrow evening. Fine at first for Canterbury, scattered rain tomorrow afternoon and evening, northwest gales inland. Otago and Southland, scattered rain developing this evening, then clearing for a time in the morning. Snow lowering to 400 metres in Southland and Clutha tomorrow evening, and southwest gales developing. And Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, a few showers for a time tomorrow. It's 8 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Ngā mihi, Evie. Hope you get a drink for that throat. No mai, hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. At least 44 people have been killed in what police suspect was a suicide bomb attack at a political rally in the northwest of Pakistan. More than 100 people were also injured in the blast, which happened close to the border with Afghanistan. The BBC's Caroline Davis reports.
A Sunday afternoon political rally by one of Pakistan's biggest religious parties, Jumayat Ulama-e-Islam. Hundreds crowded in, flags, chants, then the explosion. Imran Mahir was one of the rally's organisers on stage at the time it happened. His ears are still ringing from the blast. What do you remember after the explosion?
It was all injured people around, all dead bodies and flesh. It was like doomsday. Local people tried to help the injured. There were not enough ambulances, so people were taking their own cars.
He says that several people around him died. He isn't sure why he survived. Stretchered or carried by any hands that could offer help. The district hospital declared a health emergency and a call was put out for blood donations. As the wards filled up, some were taken by helicopter to nearby Peshawar. The death toll rose quickly. Police have said that they have struggled to identify all the dead. Among those named is a local political leader. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif condemned the attack. There has been an increase in violent attacks across Pakistan, particularly in this province. Police have said that they've discovered evidence suggesting that the explosion might have been a suicide bomber, but have not yet confirmed it. If this was an attack, it's not clear what the motive could be, and no group has claimed it, leaving many questions about what has happened and how it could affect the build-up to Pakistan's much-anticipated general election, still expected later this year.
Ukraine's President Zelensky is warning more is coming to Russia after 3 drones were shot down over Moscow. This comes as President Vladimir Putin inspected Russian naval forces during an annual parade in St. Petersburg. There is a growing sense of insecurity in Russia over the war across the border in Ukraine. Here's the BBC's Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg.
It was early morning in Moscow when this happened. Russia says it downed 3 Ukrainian drones that were targeting the capital. 2 of them smashed into skyscrapers. Though no one was killed, it added to the sense of insecurity here. But the president was upbeat, marking Navy Day in St. Petersburg. Russia's war in Ukraine has not gone at all to plan. But there's nothing like a parade of warships and submarines to project an image of Russian power.
In the name of Russia, our sailors are devoting all their energy. They are displaying true heroism. They are fighting valiantly, just like our ancestors did.
Ancestors. It's the key word. For it is by referencing past heroes and history that those in power here today try to nurture love for the motherland. We saw just that this weekend near Moscow. They were reenacting a 16th century battle when the army of Ivan the Terrible crushed invaders from the south. Russians are being told more and more that they have a glorious, victorious past. The organisers here say Russians can learn from this battle how to be victorious again today.
In Russia now, the past dominates the present. This is a country which lives in the past, which is constantly referring to the past to try to justify what it is doing now, to portray Russia's actions today as right and just.
Konstantin Malafyev is the oligarch who organised this event. The US and the EU sanctioned him for his ties to separatists in eastern Ukraine when the conflict began in 2014. Recently, the US seized $5 million of his assets over alleged sanctions violations. They'll be transferred to Ukraine.
2014 is when Russia woke up, and I'm proud to have played a part in this. No country, including the US and Britain, has the right to punish me. I am a citizen of Russia. Western sanctions are a scam, a criminal act, and criminals should be arrested and jailed. I don't know how long it will take the Russian police to get their hands on President Biden, but when they do, I'd like my money back.
Russians, forward, they cry. Reenactment over. The next battle. Russian fist fighting. An ancient sport that comes with a message. Russians are determined to win.
It's 14 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. In Australia, the rapid pace of interest rate rises is causing financial pain for many households. New data suggests some recent home buyers are being hard hit and are selling up as a result. Quick resales are at the highest level since 2014. The ABC's Rachel Papazona reports.
Brisbane real estate agent Jet Jones's days are getting busy, selling properties that have only recently changed hands.
We've seen a lot of stock that's recently come on that has turned over in the last 1 to 3 years.
She says she's seeing more borrowers facing a tough reality.
A lot of the first-time buyers that had come through that might have overextended the budget have come back and said, yeah, look, we need to sell.
CoreLogic data prepared for ABC News shows the percentage of properties up for sale that have been owned for fewer than 3 years is at a historic high. In April, almost 14% of all properties sold in Australia were bought within the past 3 years. Hobart had the highest proportion of properties sold within that time frame at almost 16%, followed by Brisbane, 15.2%, and Canberra, 13.9%. And when it comes to even quicker sales, more than 8% of properties sold nationwide had been owned for 2 years. Brisbane carries the title for that time frame, where almost 1 in 10 homes have changed hands within 24 months.
Head of Australian research at CoreLogic, Eliza Owen, says these quick sales are not all a good deal for the sellers.
We've seen these short-term loss-making resales of 2 years or less go from 3.4% of loss-making resales in the March quarter of 2022 to over 12% in the March quarter of 2023.
Eliza Owen explains quick resales are not a unique phenomenon, but the last time we saw these kinds of figures, about 6 years ago, the market was booming.
You had a lot more investor activity, consistent capital growth, and mortgage rates were low or falling. In fact, in many instances, what was happening was that investors would purchase a property, hold it until the interest-only term was up, and then resell it, in most instances, for a profit.
The difference now, she says, is that an unusually large number of recent buyers are selling up, even though they're making a loss. In Brisbane, agent Jet Jones says she's hearing from a lot of first-time buyers.
A lot of the owners that I am speaking to at the moment that are looking at putting their properties up on the market, they are roughly sitting in their late 20s to the mid-30s.
Claude Von Arx, a financial counsellor with the Victorian-based Consumer Action Law Centre, says he's hearing from more and more borrowers in mortgage stress reaching out for help.
It's the number one reason for callers that we're getting at the moment, all right? And our volumes are considerably higher than they were last year.
Until recently in China, it's been extremely difficult for single women to have children, but attitudes are changing, particularly in the big cities where more and more unmarried women are choosing to become mothers. The BBC's Stephen McDonnell reports.
2-month-old Hong Hong is being raised by his mother and grandmother. It's a lifestyle still frowned on by many, especially in rural areas or smaller towns where beliefs are more conservative. Attitudes are definitely changing towards single mothers in China, but mainly only in the big cities. Zhang Meili says she was lucky to have moved to Shanghai to run a business.
I'm grateful for the tolerance of Shanghai. I'm from rural Henan, an area which would have a lot of discrimination against me as a single mom.
She became a single mother after her boyfriend's family rejected his choice of bride because her income and status was too modest. Although she was pregnant, he broke up with her. Zhang Meili's mother says the choice to continue with a pregnancy under such circumstances would have been impossible when she was young because of community pressure and official regulations. That this change in community attitudes has happened at this precise moment in history has been crucial. With an ageing population, the government wants more babies, and yet many young couples have refused to answer the call on financial grounds. So more and more we are seeing officials starting to change the rules which had been blocking single women from giving birth. Yes, Hung Ching Ching isn't waiting for the government to sort out all the health insurance hurdles. She'll soon become a single mum on her own terms. We met her at an expo in Hangzhou, showcasing her online sales platform.
My mom always told me that women should be more independent, confident, and strong. I don't want to marry into another family just because of a child.
The UK government is pushing ahead with plans to allow fossil fuel exploration near the Shetland Islands, which sit far to the north of the Scottish mainland. The development is controversial, but so too are alternative proposals. Those would include a massive on-land wind farm, but both would provide an important economic boost. The BBC's James Cook has more.
That crackle tells you that Shetland is different. In the village of Scalloway, a replica Viking longboat is ablaze as the community celebrates its Norse heritage. Shetland Islanders have prospered from the oil in their water, taking a cut for every barrel processed to build roads, care homes and leisure centres.
I was part of that boom. We all got money in our pockets.
Arlene Robertson has worked as a cook, a cleaner and a nurse at Shetland's oil terminal. These days, she campaigns for independence for the islands.
We have to follow what's feasible, and shutting down oil and trying to import it from places like Russia doesn't make much sense to me.
I'm standing on a white sandbar with the waves lapping at either side of it, and it's connecting Shetland with St Ninian's Isle. And if I look beyond the cliffs, that is where the Rosebank oil field lies. I've come here to meet a man who lives nearby. He's a councillor for the Scottish Green Party. He's called Alex Armitage, and he does not favour drilling at Rosebank.
The fossil fuel industry is in decline. We need to be giving government subsidy towards developing that renewable energy economy.
I'm now in the centre of the main island of Shetland, and before me is a rugged landscape of green grass, but it's not as wild as it used to be because there are dozens of tall, white wind turbines, more than 70 so far, with another 30 or so still to be built. The wind farm is called Viking. It should produce enough energy to power 500,000 homes. Heather Donald is the Director of Onshore Development and Construction at SSE Renewables, which is developing the wind farm.
Overnight, this project will help Shetland decarbonise its energy system. It will benefit Scotland and the wider UK network as well.
But the Viking wind farm is not without its critics, including Arlene Robertson and Alex Armitage.
What you're seeing is so many Shetlanders shivering in their homes and looking out of their windows, seeing these gleaming turbines and not seeing any personal benefit.
I'm absolutely horrified at the poor deal that we've got. It's peanuts.
Although Viking could provide electricity to 500,000 homes, it might power the new Rosebank oil field. Reshaping the UK's energy mix is a complicated business.
Sales of electric vehicles have surged in Australia for the first half of this year, with almost 50,000 hitting the roads, according to a new report from the EV Council of Australia. But the council says until the government changes its policies, prospective buyers will continue to face a lack of choice and a limited supply of vehicles. The ABC's Samantha Donovan reports.
In an annual report, the Electric Vehicle Council of Australia says it looks like the number of EVs on our roads will double by the end of this year, with more being sold in the last 6 months than in all of 2022.
Electric vehicles are now about 8.3% of all new cars sold in Australia, and the number of models available for the different choices of electric vehicles increased by about 56% this year. So no surprise, more choice means more people are finding the type of cars that suit them and buying them.
But the Chief Executive of the Electric Vehicle Council, Buyout Jafari, says that still leaves Australia lagging the rest of the world when it comes to EV uptake.
That 8.3% is about 2 times behind the rest of the world. Now, what's quite encouraging is just a few years ago we were 10 times behind the rest of the world. But the big challenge that we have today actually isn't that Australians don't want to buy electric vehicles. In fact, quite a lot of electric vehicle models that are on that great expanding list that we've got in our report are sold out. And what we find is car makers are sending more of their models to other markets around the world, and that's why we say there's a regulation that we call fuel efficiency standards that every other market but Australia and Russia have in place. So until we get that sorted and until we get it implemented in Australia, we're going to keep finding this, where consumers are going to want to buy the cars that drivers in the USA, New Zealand, US have access to, but aren't being imported here or aren't being imported here in enough numbers to satisfy the demand for them.
But there's good news, he says, on EV affordability in Australia.
About 5 weeks ago, we had no electric cars available in Australia under $40,000. Now we have 3. So it shows you just how quickly this market is moving. But again, these are cars that were already available even in New Zealand, let alone China and Europe and the US.
The Electric Vehicle Council has given all Australian governments a score out of 10 for their policies to encourage EV uptake. The federal government gets a 7, Buyout Jafari says, because it's created a national EV policy, which the previous government hadn't. The ACT and New South Wales are on top with 9 out of 10, but the Northern Territory and Tasmania lag with scores of 4. Mr Jafari says Victoria only gets 5 out of 10.
Victoria has been something of an outlier. You wake up one morning and they've decided to remove an incentive, or they've decided to introduce a tax with no consultation. that also creates a bit of uncertainty.
Dr Gail Broadbent researches EV uptake in Australia. She supports the findings of the EV Council report, but says it fails to convey the urgency of the need for more EVs in Australia.
We need to reduce our emissions as fast as possible if we're to avert catastrophic climate change, and cars are a big part of that.
So what do you think are the key things Australia needs to do to speed up that uptake?
Well, there are two critical factors. One of them is to introduce a mandatory emissions standard with fines that's equivalent to Europe, because if you don't do that, manufacturers will just continue to sell their limited supply of EVs in Europe because there are big fines there and they need to match that. Otherwise, we're just going to miss out on a adequate supply. The other thing that we need to have is continued support for the rollout of a comprehensive charger network.
And that's EV researcher Dr Gail Broadbent ending that report. What happens when snail mail becomes spider mail? Australia Post is trying to stop a network of online retailers from sending live spiders and scorpions in the mail to bug enthusiasts and pet owners. Laws are different from state to state and are often indifferent to the safety of invertebrates. There are concerns over biosecurity risks of sending animals in the post too. The ABC's Amelia Turson has more.
Melbourne artist Chantel Mitchell recently went shopping online for an unusual purchase for her latest installation. She bought 4 native orb weaver spiders.
They came down from Queensland in this box, and these individual containers, 1 for each spider.
And did it surprise you could just order a spider in the mail?
It did, yeah, particularly across state lines as well.
Chantel Mitchell's spiders cost $30 each. She plans to rehome them with a local spider enthusiast after her exhibition. And as it turns out, you can buy more than a spider on the internet. Charlie Lasselin is a PhD student at the University of Adelaide who is investigating the online trade of invertebrate, that is, any animal without a backbone.
We actually found that there was a huge number of species being sold, over 260 species. So turns out there is quite a booming trade and a demand for them in Australia.
The PhD student found there are significant biosecurity risks that come with sending bugs across state lines.
So we found 3 invasive species, and all 3 of these, they're already known as invasive in Australia, so they're already here, but only in confined areas. And all 3 of these, they threaten agriculture, so they can damage crops and also harvesting equipment. We found that these were being traded online and being sold all around Australia, which is quite a threat to biosecurity, as potentially they're just being traded outside of their current range in areas that they aren't at the moment.
There are rules with sending most live animals through the mail. You can't post a puppy, for instance. However, there are exceptions for bees, silkworms and the broad category called harmless insects. Bug sellers argue that includes things like scorpions and tarantulas. But Australia Post says that is a false interpretation of its rules. They want insect sellers to stop. Alan Henderson has been breeding and selling invertebrates online for around 20 years. He supports a ban on venomous animals, but worries that Australia Post could be going too far.
We'd certainly support Australia Post reviewing their regulations in regard to the shipping of invertebrates around Australia, but they really need to do so with science and medical advice, rather than worrying about hysteria and myths and things like that. The vast majority of Australian invertebrates are completely harmless and pose no threat to humans.
Australia Post says it's in contact with several online businesses to ensure they understand the rules around posting live animals.
Pretty creepy. That's all we've got time for, but tomorrow on First Up at 5 a.m, the rubber hits the road when they ask National Deputy Leader Nicola Willis how they will pay for their major transport policy if they get into government.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Tēnā tātou. Good evening, I'm Evie Ashton. Napier's mayor says some residents are unhappy they'll foot some of the bill for the shared buyout of Category 3 cyclone-damaged homes in Hawke's Bay. The New Zealand Nurses Organisation says a vote in favour of a gender pay equity settlement is a significant milestone. Australia's Defence Minister says the search for 4 Defence Force personnel after a military helicopter crash in Queensland's Whitsundays on Friday night is now a recovery effort. And a suicide bomb attack at a political rally in northwest Pakistan has killed at least 44 people and injured 150. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Pacific Waves.
Bringing Kiribati back into the forum.
Diving into the big stories of the region.
They are an instrument of the Constitution of Fiji.
And shining a light on issues affecting Pacific peoples in Aotearoa and around the world.
Being able to go out into different places and areas that share special connections with our community was really special.
We talanoa to Pacific